My name is Heather Crivellari, and I am the English teacher behind the English department, which is a shop on Teachers Pay Teachers and a growing email list as well. I am going to be focusing on literary analysis today and specifically how to help move your students from being hopefully good, but maybe not good readers and analyzers of literature into confident writers of literary analysis, writing, and essays. If you have taught before, you know that it can be a real struggle. There's all kinds of different little issues, and sometimes those essays just don't go the way you want them to, despite your best efforts. So that's been my experience for sure. I've been teaching for over 12 years now, every grade between 7th and 12th, plus college composition, plus AP classes. So at every stage, I know there can be challenges, and I've uncovered a lot of guidance and tools and tips along the way that I'm so excited to share with you to help you help your students become confident in this really difficult skill. So let's talk about our session objectives today. I have so much to share with you today on how to support students in this set of skills. Some of it I couldn't even fit into this presentation, so I just have some like packed takeaways for you at the end. But what we are going to focus on and talk about, first of all, are some hidden obstacles. I say hidden because you may not even considered before how these are hindering your students' ability to fully engage in a writing topic. We're going to talk about this bridge of, which is a metaphor of scaffolding skills to get them from reading analytically to writing well. We'll talk about some sub skills or little skills that you may never have even thought to explicitly teach before, but they might be helpful in building your students' capabilities and confidence in writing. And then, like I said, I couldn't fit everything in here, so I've got some great resources and tools to save you time. You don't have to, you might take this information and be like, oh my gosh, I need to start doing all this, but I have no idea where to start to transform my lessons. Don't worry about it. I got you covered. I have the start for you. Just kind of like your students, you're going to go away with a scaffold to lead you into your success with this topic. So let's start off by talking about those hidden obstacles. All right, I'm going to take you back to when I was a first year teacher, second year teacher. I had freshmen and seniors. And the word of the time was rigor. Everything needs to be rigorous. And I had honors freshmen in particular. So I needed rigorous lessons for my freshmen, rigorous assignments. And I equated rigor with open-ended and not holding their hands, not spoon feeding them. And I gave them essay prompts like this. So there's a freshman and a senior one. My freshman one was this: analyze how at least three literary devices reveal a theme in To Kill a Mockingbird. And I would just say, look back at your notes. We did a quiz on literary devices. We'd made posters on possible themes. Look back at those things. You should be able to write this. No, I'm not going to hold your hand. And a similar one there with my seniors on character techniques. I realize now that rigor doesn't mean a lack of scaffolding. In order to be able for them to be able to access those open-ended prompts, they have to start a little bit earlier than that. And that was kind of an ego thing for me to let go of that. But once I did, the writing got a lot better and kids actually did it too. So getting more specific might be like having something like for To Kill a Mockingbird, how does Harper Lee's choice of settings develop specific conflicts in the novel? So, yes, that's only one literary device and it's conflict and not theme, but they're going to have a more focused essay on that. And I know sometimes with theme, especially, teachers don't like to give a theme in the essay prompt because they want students to interpret it on their own. Give two or three choices with two or three different interpretations that they're building towards. Anything like that would also help them find something they can access, but if it's more specific, then it's going to be not so vague and mysterious to them. Sometimes we jump straight to an essay at the end of a unit without practicing writing throughout. And even beyond that, what can be helpful is having students build up a bank of writing towards an essay by the time they get there. We'll talk about that strategy a little bit later on. But it might feel like, well, we've spent so long on this unit. We did 6 weeks of Romeo and Juliet, something like that. We just want to get it done and move on, but you're asking them to do a high stakes thing, which especially if it's worth a lot of points, if you're in traditional grades, with very little practice and build up to it. So, reading and discussing literature is not the same skill set as writing an essay. So, there needs to be some practice along the way. And they might not even be ready to write an essay with everything that you read. And that can be hard to accept because we want to get so many things in, and there are mandates about numbers of essays students have to write sometimes. But they might not be able to do that at the beginning of the year. You may have to do some types of writing building up to that. So, we will get into how we can address this obstacle a little bit later on as well. So, the last barrier to success I want to talk about is students not having enough practice with some of the smaller skills that help inform their choices in the moment when they're writing an essay. So, think about if you've ever played in a basketball team before. Before you were able to get on the court during a game, your coach probably insisted that you learn the fundamentals of the game, right? You have to learn how to dribble, you have to learn how to pass, you have to learn how to shoot. Those things just become second nature to you when you're ready to perform in the context of the game. In the same way, our students need practice, repeated practice with those small fundamental skills, hopefully, so they start to feel like second nature by the time they've written multiple essays, but definitely that they're confident with them when they write that first rhetorical or that first literary analysis essay in high school. This is a great moment before we shift into the literary analysis bridge steps. I have a handout that I included for this session. It's not very long, and I designed it to kind of help you take some notes and reflect as you went. So there's a spot here for you to record down what were those fixes. If you need to go back, you can replay that. What are the fixes for those obstacles? But then also reflecting on which of those are you already thinking about? Maybe you're even more experienced teacher than I am. How do you address those things? If you're new, or like me, took some time to consider those. What are you thinking about? Like, what are some areas where you might need to address some of these obstacles where you're starting to realize, oh, yeah, that might be why you're struggling with that? So keep this handout out if you're not already using it so you can add to the notes and reflect as we go, just like we tell our students who'll remember more if you write it down. The literary analysis bridge is the metaphor I'm going to use today to talk about getting students from, one side of things, which is reading analytically and discussing the literature, which hopefully they can do already by this point or with some success, but then getting them across to writing full essays about literature. There's a lot that has to happen in between. And for them to kind of make that transition smoothly, I've broken it down into some activities, steps, just I would say daily practices that during your literature unit will help get them ready to write those essays. So we're going to break down all of these if you want to write these steps in above the bridge on your handout. We're going to start off by talking about sentence frames, then short responses, then moving into paragraph development, which are parts of an essay, and then finally full essays and what we'll do when we get there. So let's break each of these down. All right, we know that good writers need models. This is kind of a fundamentally accepted part of writing instruction nowadays. But the model of writing needs to actually start in the thinking stage before the writing stage. So sentence frames aren't even necessarily to get them to practice their writing, although it helps. This is more about getting them to think. What is the process of analysis? What does that sound like in my head? What am I supposed to be doing? What relationship am I supposed to be noticing here? As I read something. So, using sentence frames is a practice that is great to do during reading. You can do this a few different ways depending on what type of text you're reading or what resources you have access to. I will tell you that I do a lot of these sentence frames within our textbooks. So, in my district, my students have consumable workbook textbooks, so we can do those right in the margins. However, if we're reading a novel, then I have them maybe do this on sticky notes or write it in a notebook about their own independent reading. But it's the idea is that you're giving them a structure and then they're filling it in. They are making a choice, they are doing some work, but it's just helping them frame their thoughts into something that sounds like analysis. So here's an example. If my students are reading The Most Dangerous Game, we might get to the part, mid story where Rainsford arrives on the island. And I might have them pause and in the margins of our book or in their notebooks, I might give them this on the board. The author's choice to set the story on a remote island creates, and that's where we're going to introduce maybe something like mood or something like, yeah, I think mood is probably best for this one. So students can choose like what mood is being created. Is it suspenseful? Is it eerie? Is it foreboding? Or, some other adjective. But this is a way to kind of get them thinking about the relationship between setting and the impact of a setting on the author, such as through the mood. So just little choices like that, little sentence frames are great. And I think another way to reinforce this, again, to get their reps in, so to speak, is imagine a lesson where you want to focus on setting. If you have a bell ringer, like starting with independent reading, they can do this after that text, and then maybe you guys can talk about the last short story you read, and you can use the same frame with them to talk about the setting of that. And then when you're moving into your new text, the most dangerous game, they can write about this. So you can do a lot of practice with the same frame about different texts, or you can use a lot of different ones to help them just get in the habits of thinking to create analysis. So, in addition to, or maybe beyond the sentence frames, um, think about ways that you can start building in short responses to text. So, just a few sentences, maybe 1 to 2 full paragraphs if you have a smaller class or more advanced writers. But I know sometimes the hesitancy for teachers to assign practice writing is they feel nervous that they can't give feedback on it because it takes them so long, to give feedback on everything that they do in the classroom, especially essays. So this is a model I'm going to show you of how I embed these short responses. And I found a good strategy is to tack them on to other exercises. So if I'm teaching To Kill a Mockingbird, we can't write in the novels. So I pull out a passage from it, I type it up. And in this case, this example one here, this is on characterization, like direct and indirect characterization, I think, about Atticus Finch in an early chapter of the book. So I have some guided annotation tools, like a close reading activity. But then I ask students to find more evidence that supports, something that we're discovering about Atticus. The short response analytical, like literary analysis writing, is actually just done at the very bottom of this on those last 3 lines. It's a question that asks students to make an assessment of Atticus's character. It's in more student friendly language than that, but it helps them kind of bring all of that together. And the goal with these short responses is just on explaining evidence, that part of analysis. We're not worrying about structure. We're not worrying about rich commentary transitions. Just can we take a piece of evidence and explain what it's doing there? The other thing that is so important about doing these short responses periodically while you're reading is as well as I do that a lot of times students struggle with literary analysis and fall right into summary and they think they're doing it right. This is a great way to catch those kids who are summarizing when they think they're analyzing and help them, support them in fixing that early on. Otherwise, you don't want them to waste their time writing a whole draft of an essay that's just a summary of what you've read. So this is a great way to kind of offer that targeted support. And if on this, I can quickly give feedback on that and I see, oh, they've just summarized the passage, then I can give it back to them and kind of explain what's different, maybe show them a model from another student, and then we can correct that. So these are super helpful ways to check in on those things. They can tack on easily to other assignments, and they don't take very long to check over and give feedback on. All right. So paragraph writing is the step between doing those short practices where we're not super concerned about form, just evidence and explaining it, and then writing the whole essay. And sometimes people neglect this step, and sometimes that's intentional if you have, more advanced or older students. But if you have younger students, junior high, ninth graders, or just reluctant writers up through high school, I've had all of those. This is a great strategy. And I call this sometimes just banked writing. It's when you have them write a body paragraph, maybe two, maybe one to each of the prompt choices ahead of time before you even assign the essay. And the purpose of this, I mean, there's so many benefits to it. One, you can check in on their progress on the essay in a small way if you don't have time to do a writing conference with a class of 30 or 40 kids. You can just look at that paragraph as they go. If the first one's good, then they're on track to do a good one, in the second paragraph. Another benefit for just psychologically for students, when you do assign an essay and they already have a paragraph of it done, that's doing two things. One, it's more motivating. It's like, oh, I have to write an essay. Oh, but I already wrote some of it. Hey, all right, that's great. I've already made progress. But also, oh, I've already wrote this. I can write this. I don't need to go to ChatGPT. I don't need to go to Spark Notes because I can already write this. I just have to continue what I've already started. And so that is a huge, huge win, um, as well, just, in a climate of students kind of doing everything but writing their own work these days. And another thing I want to point out is that if you really do need to build those foundational skills with topic sentences, evidence, commentary for body paragraphs, I understand that you might not want to do that with the text understudy for the essay. So, for example, my quarter two freshman might be gearing up to write an essay about To Kill a Mockingbird. Rather than focus on To Kill a Mockingbird for a model body paragraph writing experience, we might focus on The Most Dangerous Game or some other short story from quarter one that we were all still vaguely familiar with and can remember. And so they kind of have that as a model as well to take into their current text that they're working on. So this is also possibly where you might stop if you have younger students, or if you have, struggling ninth, 10th graders. They might not be ready to do a full essay with the thing you just read. That might need to come with the next unit. They might just stop here, and one good body paragraph is good enough. All right, so eventually you'll be able to reach our target, which is to write a full essay. And as you can kind of see, this is a combination of a lot of skills. So it's a big victory when students are ready to write an essay. And if you've been doing those pieces along the way, you won't need so much scaffolding at this point. When I neglected to do some of those along the way steps, I found myself having to supplement with like hyper specific graphic organizers that would have been more useful activities or practices broken into small pieces throughout. But by the time we get to a full essay, when they've banked writing, they have a lot of notes and annotations. Uh, they've got a lot to go off of. So I just want to remind you at this step, that first obstacle that we talked about, do make sure you have a clear prompt, and that's a specific literary analysis prompt, and give choices when you can so students can kind of explore different elements that they are familiar with, or different interpretations of the novel or short story or poem or drama, whenever you're writing about. So, as we've already talked about, different grade levels of students, different skill levels of classes may need to practice this bridge differently. If you have seventh or eighth graders, they might not even be writing full essays until much later in the year, and you're mostly working with those sentence stems, and you're working with those practice writing passages, maybe paragraphs, maybe essay at the end of the year. This is high school has been the land I've been living in for the last several years, so this is kind of how it might look different at three levels of high school. Ninth grade, sentence frames, short responses in quarter one, move into paragraphs and essays in quarter two with our study of literature. 10th grade, they've already written a few essays by that point. So we might kick off with paragraphs in quarter one and develop an essay and then move on from there. But at the high end, at AP Lit, don't think that you don't need these scaffolds, because those kids come in and yeah, they might be really good at analyzing the set of literary devices that they know and linear narratives and more traditional types of writing that we've done in the core grade levels. But there's so much new stuff that's introduced at an AP or dual credit level. They're not, you can't expect them to know like how to write about how polysyndeton impacts the rhythm of a poem. So those are things they're going to need these scaffolded models for. Then we have this idea of complexity, and they are going to need some practice every time something new is introduced. So be mindful that just because it's AP or dual enrollment doesn't mean no scaffolds. No, you don't have to hold their hands, but they still need some support until they're confident in taking it on independently. So, one of the obstacles we talked about earlier on was students not having opportunities to get their reps in on those fundamentals. There are so many skills that, as a practice writer, you just take for granted. You don't even think about making the moves. Here are some of them on this slide if you want to pause and read through that list. But making sure you take the time to teach those things explicitly when you have those opportunities can make it a lot easier for students to confidently make those choices as writers in the moment when they're writing that essay. And some of them will take more practice than others. That's why I put together another page in that handout that's a guide to activities that can kind of reinforce and introduce those skills in the moment. So sometimes people are reluctant to use scaffolds, sentence stems, or guided writing methods like this because they're afraid of having dependent students that always want their handheld and won't write without a graphic organizer and all of that. So it is important to make sure you think about, all right, are my students ready to take some of those scaffolds away? And now I'm not obviously you're always going to have some students that it's a documented accommodation, they need a graphic organizer, or students that, for whatever reason, just individually need those things. But I'm kind of talking more about how you present instruction to the whole class. So here are some signs that your class as a whole might be ready to move away from these built-in scaffolds. So if you get to a point that your students can choose and explain evidence, without a lot of prompting or reminders, they're pretty good at just like, oh yeah, I think this because it says, and they can pick it up automatically. That's a good sign. If they can start moving from those literal observations to deeper interpretations, now that level of depth obviously is going to be different depending on whether you're teaching seventh grade ELA or 12th grade AP Lit. But if they start moving that direction, that's great. And then if their commentary is connecting those specific details to themes or purposes, they're doing a rich job of expanding on their evidence and explaining how it unlocks something bigger. So if the majority of your class is doing that more naturally, more fluently, then yeah, in your next literature unit, take some of those things away and just kind of remind them, like, hey, we know what to do with literature. Let's do those things, but I don't need to remind you at every step of the way. You can do those on your own. And then at that point, that's when students might be more ready for those open ended responses. Now, I'm not saying throw them into the deep end and just like analyze the theme, go. But you need to, maybe a little bit more specificity there, but they're more likely to be able to take on, say, an AP Lit style, open ended prompt where they choose the devices, they choose the theme, and how those things link together. So it's not just about using the scaffold, but it's also when to take it away. That is essential as well to build independent students, which of course is what we want. So our big takeaways today, or you may get whatever, but the big points I want to emphasize today is that literary analysis will feel more doable to your students when we break it down throughout the reading and not just at the end of the reading, right? And that bridge of skills will move students from guided to more independent analysis. We need to target those specific automatic fundamental type skills to help students make decisions in the moment as they write. And we need to know when to remove that scaffolding when it's no longer needed to make sure that they remain independent, and they are successful in the long term. All right.